We're ready.
Good morning from New York. It's a hot and steamy morning in New York right now. I think the humidity is somewhere around 99%. So it's really enjoyable to walk outside. Good evening to those who are in nighttime. Good afternoon to those who are in the middle of the day. We have almost all of our board members are here, but I will note a couple of apologies due to unmovable commitments. Josephine is one, but rest assured, she's fully supportive of the materials that are presented. Robert also will not be with us today. Wolf will speak on his behalf if any issues arise. And Kai has had a flight delay, so he may be joining us late as well. So everyone has all the agenda papers for the video conference. Notice of this meeting has been provided to the public. We do have a public one of our observers here. I see Philippe has just joined the IAASB. One thing also to note that we have our fraud task force joining us all together in one room. I see them joining us from London right now as well. And at some point, we may be joined by another observer or two. Just to remind you of what the reason for this sort of in-between call, this mid-session call, is we tend to use these to bring back issues that have been turned since the last meeting. And then this one is there's some targeted items, particularly related to our coordination with IAASB. When we met in June, I mentioned that we are having a coordination meeting in London with the task force chairs from both boards, the senior leadership from both boards, and the staff teams from both boards as it relates to sustainability matters. I'm really pleased. I see Ken Seung has joined us today too. Ken, thank you for joining. But the spirit of cooperation between the two boards leading up to and during those sessions has been great. Just as a reminder, some of the topics that we were talking about between the two boards were definitions and terminologies, the premises of quality management and relevant ethical requirements, group assurance engagements, including group and value chain components, using the work of another practitioner, using the work of a practitioner's expert, communication with the auditor, and select matters related to transparency in the assurance report. Following our discussions with that coordination meeting, the task forces met last week in London too to kick the tires, so to speak, on what we agreed, and further progress was made on coordination matters. I think we're in a really good spot on this, and there's much of that is what's being presented in these board papers. So we're moving rapidly, trying to address the issues, trying to bed these issues down to give people confidence that we're coming to coordinated and complementary positions. The team will present only the significant changes in the draft standard since our last meeting. And so that is really what we're going to talk to you about today. In Josephine's absence, I'm going to turn the floor over to Villy, and then Dan and Claire are going to shepherd us through the documentation today. But before we start, any questions or comments on our plan for today? Okay, hearing none. Villy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Sustainability Assurance session. As Tom has indicated, in Josephine's absence, it will be myself, Claire, and Dan who will take the board through the material, and we are very much looking forward to receiving your input on these targeted issues. So, Michelle, you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the 8 topics that you see on the slide and that Tom has also referred to encapsulate the matters that have been the subject of ongoing coordination between the IAASB and IAASB teams. And just to note that we have had close coordination at the staff level throughout the projects of the two teams, but as expected, this has intensified after the exposure period for both board standards. These are the items that we will be focusing on today. Tom also alluded to the July 15 meeting where the board chairs were present as well. And based on that meeting, a number of these matters were agreed are fully aligned, and you would have seen that in agenda item 1A as well. And for a number of other items, we have agreement in principle, but obviously some of the wording still needs to be looked at. And as we indicated in the cover note for this meeting, we are focusing on these issues from an ISA 5000 perspective. We want to get our board's input on what we are proposing with respect to addressing these topics. But also note that because of the timing of the two project teams task force meetings last week in London and the posting for this board call, the teams have not yet had an opportunity to comment on changes arising from those task force meetings. But the coordination will continue. In actual fact, immediately after this board call today, we have another coordination call on the experts project with the IAASB team. But we felt it was important at this point to bring it to the board so that we can get the board's views on this before we start finalizing the draft for the September meeting. So that is in terms of introductory remarks. We will address the topics in the sequence that they appear in the slides, and you've got the proposed drafting in agenda item 1B. And I will hand over to Claire and Dan now, and Claire and Dan will pause at various intervals to receive the board's input on the proposed changes. So Michelle, you can go to the next slide, and then with that, Claire, I think you are first up, so I'm handing over to you.
Very much, Billy, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. So I'm going to go through these first three topics. I'll go through the changes that have been made in the discussions with IAASB, and then pause for the board's comments before we move on to the next set of matters. So firstly, the definitions of sustainability information, excuse me, and sustainability matters. Now, as agreed with the board in June, we retained the core definitions here. And in the case of sustainability matters, pared down to the core definition. So for sustainability information, that core definition is information about sustainability matters. And everything else related to that definition has been moved down to essential explanatory material. So that appears, as you'll see in the paper, under for the purposes of ISSAs. So it still sits within the definition, but it's clearly separated. So for sustainability matters, the core definition, we've stripped away the detail that reflected the double materiality perspective and moved that to application material. And these two core definitions now reflect the wording agreed between the IAASB and IAASB. So IAASB have also agreed to simplifying those definitions down to the core wording, and IAASB will also include matters for the purposes of the code. So you'll see that the more detailed wording in the paper, so I won't repeat that for sustainability matters. And we feel that this now really clearly separates and creates alignment. So the second matter here is the definition of relevant ethical requirements. So we have amended the definition, and you'll see that the wording reflected in the paper. We've reinstated reference to the code, and that was really important for IAASB because we had really simplified this definition down in the June papers. But we've reinstated the reference to the code, and the board had also agreed to that in June. And we've also reinstated material that had been included in March to provide greater alignment with the requirement for relevant ethical requirements in paragraph 33 that we'll come to later. Now the definition clarifies that relevant ethical requirements can be the code or professional requirements or requirements in law or regulation that an appropriate authority has determined to be at least as demanding as the code. And the critical aspect here in incorporating these additional words was so that we could then use and do use throughout the standard the term relevant ethical requirements, and that would encapsulate requirements at least as demanding, not only the IAASB code. So the third matter that I want to cover off before I open up for comments is the premises of quality management and relevant ethical requirements. So as we know, ISO Say 5000 is premised on the application of ISQM1 and the IAASB code, or requirements that are at least as demanding. So following concerns raised by IAASB, we discussed at the June meeting, and the board agreed to remove the third option for the relevant ethical requirements. That was the firm determination of requirements that would be at least as demanding. So for quality management, and for ethics, we have removed that third requirement, and you'll see that in the drafting in the paper. And we've deleted the related application material that provided further explanation on that third firm determination. So IAASB have seen that change, and clearly that addressed their concerns. We have some additional changes to the definition, the premises in that requirement, in the requirements for quality management and ethics. The lead-in for the paragraph 33 for ethics, this was really amended to simplify the lead-in and to be more consistent with 3000, and also the construct of the quality management requirement in paragraph 29. We've also amended the application material to address offline comments. First of all, to allow for standard setters for ethics. So we've added in the appropriate standard setters phrase of the paragraph, or related relevant ethical requirements. So standard setters for related relevant ethical requirements to encapsulate those standard setters that are often separate from audit or assurance standard setters. We've also allowed for the broader range of standard setters with additional wording or a designated accreditation organisation recognised by a public authority. So that's really the key changes for those three matters on your screen. So now I'll open up for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Well, one other thing, that by doing these changes, we are also being responsive to the public interest issues as well, not just the mere fact that we want coordination, but particularly on removing that third track. As people remember, that was an issue that was raised by the PIOB and other public authorities. So just wanted to highlight that public interest aspect.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So I am generally comfortable where we have the only area where I had quite a bit of concern is in the definition of sustainability matters, where we now speak of factors. Well, in our standards, we use factors in an entirely different manner, and I could tie it to topics, where we have a nice appendix 1 that explains the interrelationships with sustainability information, sustainability matters, topics, and aspects of topics. So I would expect this to be changed to topics. Otherwise, our appendix 1 stops making sense. And I also struggle with the notion of aspects of factors. So I think that sounds very odd. Thank you.
Sachiko?
Thank you, and hello, everybody. I'm also a support of the general direction, and I only have two comments on this area. And one is about the definition of relevant ethical requirement. And the added sentence states, relevant ethical requirement ordinarily, blah, blah, blah. But I think the word ordinary is not needed now, because in accordance with paragraph 33, small a and small b of the standard, the practitioner is required to comply with either the provision of the IAASB code together with national requirements that are more restrictive, or professional requirement in lower regulation that an appropriate authority has determined to be at least as demanding. In other words, I think there are only two options. Thus, I do not think the word ordinarily is needed. And my second comment is about the premise of quality management and REB. And my comment is about the wording in A58 big B and A48 big B, A48 big A, that is a designated accreditation organization recognized by a public authority. And I think not all people can clearly understand what it means, because I understand it refers to the kind of higher organization that provide accreditation to certification bodies who provide certification services to the entities. But because the word accreditation and certification are similar, I think some people may misinterpret that the accreditation organization in this application materials mean the organization who is recognized by the public authority to provide certification services to the entities. Therefore, I would suggest clarifying the meaning in the application materials or providing explanation in the first-time implementation guide to aid consistent understanding. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric?
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Claire, for the introduction. I'm also generally supportive of the direction here. I had some comments on the first three matters. Similar to Sachiko, I was not clear on the need for ordinarily in the definition, given the changes that we have in paragraph 33. And I had the same views as Sachiko in that respect. I'm also struggling with the phrase that's used in several places, where it talks about the professional requirements or requirements in law or regulation that an appropriate authority has determined to be at least as demanding. And it's just the maybe it's grammar, but just the phrase that an appropriate authority has determined to be at least as demanding. I'm just wondering, is that phrase meant to apply to both the professional requirements and the requirements in law or regulation, or is it meant to just apply to the requirements in law or regulation? And I just don't think it's clear right now. And in some places we've got commas in there, and then in the definition there's no commas. So I think it's just needs to be made a bit more consistent. I also had comments similar to Sachiko around A58B and A48, and it's related to the last sentence, that such organizations may have undertaken an assessment, and it refers to jurisdictional requirements, and similar to Sachiko, where it's a certification body, it would be I presume the assessment wouldn't really be around jurisdictional requirements. It could apply across a broad range of jurisdictions, depending on how those are used. And secondly, I just wasn't sure what the purpose of that sentence was, or what its importance is. Whether the organization may have or may not have undertaken an assessment. I'm just not sure what the importance of that is. So I wondered whether that sentence is really needed, or whether it could be dropped without losing the important guidance that's already in the first sentence that explains what an appropriate authority is. In 33, as Claire mentioned, you've tried to simplify the wording there, but we've removed in the introductory words the reference to relevant ethical requirements. And given that the subheading is about relevant ethical requirements, and the requirement doesn't have any reference to relevant ethical requirements now, I just wondered whether we should just retain the wording just to make it crystal clear what we're referring to here. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Michelle?
Yeah, thank you. I am in agreement with the changes. I just wanted to get a clarification that with respect to the appropriate authority, whether it is in sync with the paragraph 5 of the IAASB International Framework, because in 5B we do use the terms of other professional requirements or requirements in law and regulation. But there we do not have the term appropriate authority. So whether this would be in sync with the framework. That was my only observation. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much for the comments, and I'll respond, and then I'll ask, Dan and Billy also if they have any further clarification. On the definitions of sustainability information and sustainability matters, Edo, you commented about you concerned with the use of the word factors in that definition, and this was a matter of considerable coordination with IAASB to reach a term that was comfortable for both task forces. So I would say that this is quite critical that we align this wording with IAASB, and as it stands, that sustainability matters definition does align exactly with IAASB. Now, you've suggested an alternative being topics. We do know, though, that matters encompasses both topics and aspects of topics. So arguably topics would be a little bit too limiting. This is very much trying to be very broad, this definition, without narrowing down to specific frameworks and being open to future development. So, we're I guess avoiding saying these matters about matters. So, and really we think the environmental social governance and opening to other sustainability related factors really keeps it very broad and should be understandable with respect to a plain English definition. Edo, maybe you wanted to respond to that, I can see.
Yes, thank you. And appreciate that we want to align here, and appreciate that you don't want to refer from matters to matters, but that is what it is. And this would be, so we use factors in the standards as things to think about when you consider or when you evaluate, and that's throughout all our standards. We don't use factors as a piece of disclosure. And I think this is just confusing to use the word factors. I appreciate that ESRS uses factors, but then we just need to be consistent throughout. And then we need to look at Appendix 1 and align it with it. And that's fine if you want to go through that effort, but I do not think that factors is the right word here.
Okay, well, anyone else object to the use of factors in this context for the sake of coordination? I think the probably one of the ways to do it is to see what element of alignment needs to be done or clarification in other the application material maybe. I see someone in the fraud group, Wendy, wants to come in.
How'd you know that? Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good day. I just wanted to support Edo's comments. I also felt that factors was, and I am sitting in the fraud task force meeting where we've been talking a lot about factors. I think it's out of context in the ISA 5000 standards. And I would prefer to use words that are already there, and I would have suggested matters and taking the matters out of the first part of it. But I'll leave that back to you to wordsmith it. But Tom, you asked if anybody else objected, so yes, I object.
So again, as I go back to what we said at the last meeting, sometimes, unless it's wrong, sometimes there's value in terms of coordination between the two boards. And the word factors does matter quite a bit in terms of the IAASB code, which is the existing, I think, terminology used. One of the suggestions that people are okay with it is, can we figure out, look at other language in it? I see Ken coming in right now, so maybe you could give some clarification too.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. Not that I'm going to try to solve this now, but what I wanted to say is that I would be very open to taking this comment back to my task force, my work stream too, for their consideration. I understand the nature of the concern that's been expressed, and it's been clearly articulated on this call from both Edo and Wendy. So we'll take that back, and don't want really to indicate that all matters of coordination are closed at this point. So any comments that are raised that merit some further consideration, I would say I'm very open to raising this with my task force.
But I do want to get a sense from the board too, is if it's important for coordination to keep the term factors, and it's important to have the definitions aligned. Maybe there's another remedy that Edo suggested the task force could do. Like this, to me, I hope it's not a fatal flaw issue for anyone. Am I correct in understanding that? Edo?
I don't know yet, Tom. That depends where we end up and how Appendix 1 then gels together and how the standard hangs together. So I need to. I'm not going to say whether I think it's a fatal flaw now. I think I just don't have enough information to make that decision.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And just on this point, I wanted to say that when the task force discussed this last week, the task force did not have a problem with the term factors, understanding that it is used in ESRS, and understanding that it was part of, or has been part of, IAASB's definition for quite some time. The task force view was that basically we all understand what we're talking about, and the definition, the core definition, is now pointing to essentially the criteria, and the criteria are going to lay out the items, call them what you will, factors, matters, whatever, and we just happen to use factors as kind of a very general term in the definition, but throughout the standard, we all know what we're talking about. These sustainability matters that are driven by the criteria, and we're talking about topics and aspects of topics of those for disclosure. So that was the task force view, Tom. And Ken has helpfully indicated that you may take this back to his work stream, and we can further coordinate from there.
Bill?
Just to level the conversation, I don't think it's important, and maybe there might be other members of a similar view. So, with all respect to you, Edo, I just think we've got to realise that this meeting today is all about coordination with IAASB and moving this stuff forward. So, I would really like a fatal flaw to be something which is of greater significance than that.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, should we move on to the next topic? Ken's going to take it back to the work stream. For the most part, this is not a die-in-the-wool issue. Coordination matters. We can think about other things. We note Edo's and Wendy's comments. Next response, Claire.
Thanks, Tom. And we can also look at Appendix 1 and just, make sure that it's aligning well with that definition, because I heard that as being a concern. So the definition of relevant ethical requirements, we heard some comments from Sachko and Eric that they didn't like the term ordinarily in that definition, and that relevant ethical requirements, I wasn't quite clear on this point, but that relevant ethical requirements was removed from that definition, but bearing in mind that it is a definition of relevant ethical requirements, I wasn't quite clear on that point. However, I will speak just briefly about the ordinarily comment. That term we did discuss at length with the task force, and I understand it was to allow for that it would ordinarily comprise the code, as we know, together with national requirements, or something that appropriate authority would find at least as demanding. So allowing for, I guess, some level of flexibility. It is pinned down, though, very much in the requirement in paragraph 33. So that clearly states what is allowed under ISSA 5000. So I don't know whether there's anything more Billy wants to explain that one further. Thank you.
No, thank you, Claire. So part of the consideration was, excuse me, part of the consideration was when we reinstated this. So the definition originally, before we changed the definition was aligned with the definition we use in QM1 and in other standards. And so when we reinstated this, we saw the ordinarily and obviously compared that to paragraph 33. But we believe that we would prefer to keep the ordinarily in the definition for exactly that reason, that it is aligned with the relevant ethical requirements definitions elsewhere in our standards. And then when we got to paragraph 33, we thought, well, we went back to ISA 3000 revised, and we saw, and this also addresses one of Eric's other points, is that we can shorten the leading and not refer to comprise, because that may cause confusion, and simply state that for this requirement, the practitioner shall comply with, and then have the A and the B. And so that is sort of where we landed on keeping ordinarily in the definition, but then not cause confusion in the requirement by then saying just comprise and shortcutting it or making it briefer by looking at ISA 3000 revised to just state the requirement. You shall comply with A or B. And that is where we arrived at this point. So I don't know if that helps people, but that's the rationale for where we are at the moment.
Thanks very much, Billy.
And
certainly, sorry, and yes, I see now, Eric, it was about paragraph 33 that you're referring as Billy mentioned, where we've taken out relevant ethical requirements. So yeah, so that's just to make it much cleaner and clearer, we were hoping. So the further comment that Vishal asked a question about whether the term appropriate authority was consistent with the assurance framework. So I haven't had a chance to go and look at that at this moment, unless Dan or Billy have had a chance to look at that. We'll just have to double check the alignment there, Vishal.
Now, look, the assurance framework simply refers to the premises of quality management and relevant ethical requirements. Sorry, I'm also just going to quickly go to paragraph 5. Yeah, so the assurance framework in paragraph 5 refers to ethical principles and quality management standards, and it refers to the premises of its IAASB code or requirements, other requirements or law regulation that is least as demanding, and the same with Tier 1. So that is just at that level. I don't think the framework is not going into detail about who makes the determination of at least as demanding, and neither is any of our other standards. The first time we ran up against this was in ISA 5000, and I don't think the fact that we've clarified it for ISA 5000 is in conflict with the framework. I think what's in the framework still stands, and I cannot anticipate that we are going to make a change to the framework because of this. I think in ISA 5000, it serves a particular purpose to clarify what at least this demanding means and what we mean by an appropriate authority.
Thank you. Would it be a useful moment, like, to pause on the last 2 points, the ordinarily discussion and also here? Does this make sense, the explanations? Sachiko?
Thank you, and thank you, Claire and Billy, for your explanation. I understand that because we need ordinarily in the definition to be consistent with our relevant ethical requirement in our other standards. Now I can understand that my little remaining worry is that now it looks like we use the relevant ethical requirement and the requirement about what you need to comply with in a different context. So I'm not sure at this time of moment whether that will create some, confusion. But if I found something in the application material, I will, I will let you know. But so far, I now understand the reason with some remaining some little, concern. Thank you.
Ken?
Thank you, Tom. I really don't want to throw a spanner in the works here in terms of the direction where this is going relative to Sachiko's comment on using the word ordinarily. But there's a bit of a history behind, and that goes to my time with the IAASB more than a decade ago. There's a bit of history behind the use of the term ordinarily when the term relevant ethical requirements was defined in the ISAs in what was then ISQC 1. And precisely that term was intended to cover basically bullet B. If one were to go back to all the discussions at IAASB then. So I hadn't clued in on Sachiko's comment when I did review the sort of the definition as it is in ISSC 5000. But I think Sachiko does have a point that the concept of ordinarily in extent IAASB standard is intended, or at least was intended to cover essentially bullet B as it is articulated in the current draft of ISA 5000. So that's just for your consideration.
Okay. Claire, anything else you'd like to respond to?
Yes, I was going to respond to the premises of the comments made on regard to the premises of quality management and ethics. But I didn't know, Tom, firstly, whether you were comfortable with where we've landed on ordinarily and the relevant ethical requirement reference.
I thought people accepted the explanation and understood the context, so I don't think there's need for us to change.
Okay.
Sachiko said she was going to look at some of the application material for some further understanding, and that was my takeaway from it.
Great, thanks for the clarification. So with respect, there was some comment to the relevant ethical requirements and quality management. Sachiko didn't clearly understand or felt there was a little bit of that people could misunderstand the new phrase or a designated accreditation organisation recognised by a public authority, and you know whether accreditation certification could be confused, and there. I think Eric had similar, my understanding was that Eric, your concerns were similar to Sachiko's, and the clarification between, you know, professional requirements versus, you know, what accreditation organisation may provide. So essentially, there was a suggestion, also Eric suggested we could just drop that additional material that I just read out regarding the accreditation organisation. So the intention of this, adding this phrase, was to broaden, to recognise that there could be organisations, more global organisations that do set standards and requirements that public authorities do adopt in different jurisdictions. So it was really to recognise that it might not just sit neatly in a national standard setter as we see them in the audit space. So you know we don't want this may be getting a little long, so perhaps that's confusing. So we could certainly have a think about whether there's some way of simplifying this paragraph, but I don't know whether Dan or Billy had a strong view on the designated accreditation organisation beyond what I've explained.
Yeah, I think Sachiko has also brought this point up, and I think Eric raised a number of points around language matters. And I think at this point, we just take that on. We can have a look at the language, and if there's any way that or any reason to clarify, or any way we can clarify it, we can certainly have a look at that.
And Sachiko, as I remember, and it was implicit that some of it could be in the first time application material as well. In my mind, this was an important addition to deal with some of the profession agnostic related matters that we were dealing with. And so losing the language or cutting it off may not make sense, but the first time application material and further explanation may be relevant as well. Dan and then Eric.
Yeah, Tom, just further to the point that you made about the implementation guidance, and Sachiko, I think I did hear you say that perhaps some clarification could be provided either in the application material or the guidance, and so that can be explored. But another possibility here is also to have some explanation in the basis for conclusions, because this is something that was added specifically after the exposure draft and in response to the comments that arose. And so that the basis for conclusions would be another good place to have a little bit of explanation about the intent and the meaning of this.
Thank you, Dan. Eric?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say I was comfortable with the reference to accreditation organization. My comment was mainly around the following sentence, which has not changed, but now that the previous sentence talks about accreditation organizations who may be determining whether the requirements are at least as demanding as ISQM1, they wouldn't be necessarily related to a specific jurisdiction. And so I just wondered, my question or suggestion was whether we really need that second sentence at all, because it doesn't, to me, add much to what we've already got in the previous sentence, which I thought was okay. So that was just to clarify my comment from before. Thanks.
Okay, I think that, as Billy said, well, the task force will take that back. Having that sentence isn't a fundamental coordination issue, so but let the task force consider that. Okay, any other responses or input on these first three topics on this slide? Should we press forward? I don't know, Claire, if it's you or Dan who would take it.
Yeah, so Dan will take the next slide. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, Claire, and welcome again, everyone. Just focusing first on the group assurance engagements. As noted on the slide, we're really fully aligned now with IAASB on the principles and are using the same underlying concepts. The task force has, though, made a few revisions to further assist with the alignment. You'll recall in the June draft, we had paragraph A13X in the application material that indicated that a component could be either a group component or a value chain component. And as a part of the coordination discussions, it was noted that it would be more helpful for IAASB if that element was actually part of the definition. So in fact, the task force has now proposed to add as essential explanatory material to the definition of component those words from old paragraph A13X. And the only other change in the definition here to component practitioner, this is not really related to the coordination discussions, but just for the board's information, that change was made to address a request from the board in June to include that as part of the definition. It was previously in the application material, and you'll see that the task force also made a similar change in the definition of another practitioner. And then the last bit here on groups is a new paragraph. It says A13A, whatever it will turn out to be in the renumbered draft in September. But it's a new paragraph that was added based on a comment from an IAASB board member. When Willie and I and Josephine presented to the IAASB board in June, one of their board members indicated that it would be helpful to have application material to describe those circumstances, maybe limited circumstances, in which it may be possible for the practitioner to be sufficiently and appropriately involved in the work of another firm at a value chain component. So yeah, it's kind of the exception to the rule, if you will, that in most cases, another firm in the doing work in the value chain would not be able to be sufficiently and appropriately involved, therefore would be another practitioner. So what would the circumstances be that would flip that to being a component practitioner? So that's the reason for that particular addition. And Tom, I'm going to stop there, and maybe we'll just see if there are any board comments or questions on what has been done here on groups, because other than this, there are really no other matters of alignment to discuss.
Okay. So.
Hi, apologies for the no camera. I'm on an unstable Wi-Fi. we had some practical questions around the A13A and the example in particular, where just trying to think through how that would work in practice, whether you would have a direct engagement between the practitioner and the supplier. And also how that then flowed into the phrase in those circumstances, because Dan, I think you referred to how you tipped over the bar, and I felt that would only happen if the practitioner chose to exercise that ability that management has. And so I wonder whether the wording should be that in those circumstances the firm may be able to have a component practitioner, because it would only happen if they then chose to go down that route, but they might choose to go down alternative routes as well. Thanks.
Julie?
So Dan, appreciate what you've done here. And in fact, I didn't speak before, so just generally the direction was good with the paper. I had originally thought defining group component and value chain component would be worthwhile. However, I did a search for through all the requirements, and we don't refer to them in the requirements. So I got comfortable with the fact that you're dealing with the description of what those are in the essential material. So I got myself comfortable with that. I was happy that we had included or proposing to include A13 big A, but hearing Sue's comment about, I think it's really the last sentence of that paragraph, probably making it more of a practitioner decision versus an absolute statement would be preferable for me, but I was happy with the proposed inclusion of that paragraph. I think it sets out the reality of where value chain entities may, where it's going to fall in reality. So.
Okay. Dan, I see no other hands. Any reaction?
No, and thanks, Sue and Julie, for the input. I think the task force can take this back and have a look at the wording of A13A, and particularly that last sentence, because Sue, both you and Julie referred to that. So that's what the task force will do. See if we can come up with better words. And if you do have any specific wording suggestions that you would like to pass along, please do so. That'd be very helpful.
And then maybe in that context, it may be worthwhile changing the order slightly. So we now end with "in those circumstances," but if we make that the second sentence, that may, and provide the example after the implications, that could help you in dealing with Julie's and Sue's concerns.
Yeah, thanks, Ado. That's a very, very good suggestion. We'll definitely look at that.
Okay, Dan, you can proceed.
Yeah, so let's move then to using the work of another practitioner. That there's a little more involved with this one, and Tom, what I would propose to do is walk the board through both. There are two issues here, or matters relating to using the work of another practitioner. Walk through both of them and the task force's proposals, and then open it up for any discussion, comments, or questions. So as noted on the slide, the boards are fully aligned on the principles here. The principle being that component practitioner being part of the engagement team, another practitioner not. That if you're going to use the work of a firm other than the practitioner's firm, it's driven by the ability of the engagement leader to be sufficiently and appropriately involved in the work. And if you are able to, then you're down the component practitioner route. And if not, you're going down the another practitioner path. The two issues, the first one relates to the board will recall a change that was made in the June draft to refer to work rather than assurance work of another practitioner. And the board was comfortable with that change, but the task force did note that further coordination with IAASB would be needed because the relevant ethical requirements may differ based on the nature of the work that is performed. Since the June meeting, the focus of the coordination discussions has been on adding appropriate, call them hooks or bridges in ISSA 5000 to provide for the fact that the relevant ethical requirements may, in fact, differ depending on the nature of the work, whether it's assurance work or non-assurance work. And so the specific proposals that you see in the paper, just running through those quickly. First of all, in the definition of another practitioner, the core of addressing this issue is in the two new paragraphs that are being added to. Excuse me. In the definition, it's the let me first say that the change to or the movement from application material, the old paragraph A22, into the definition in points A and B are really to address the next issue that we'll talk about. And so to address this kind of work versus assurance work issue, these two new paragraphs that you see in the application material. The first one is to acknowledge, just simply acknowledge, that the relevant ethical requirements may in fact differ based on the nature of the work. And then the second paragraph leverages paragraph 8B of ISA 3000 revised to describe characteristics of engagements that may look like assurance engagements, but are not assurance engagements as they're defined or described in the IAASB standards. I'd also note that the task force discussed expanding this particular application material to bring in some points from paragraph 6 of 3000, which also discusses engagements that are not assurance engagements. And the task force will have a further look at that. And then the requirement, which in paragraph 51, the general requirements for the practitioner to be able to use the work of another practitioner. We have revised that requirement, part A, to essentially require the practitioner to look to and comply with relevant ethical requirements that apply to using the work of another practitioner. And then we've got some application material changes. The change to paragraph A107A was again to acknowledge that this work could be either assurance or non-assurance work. The principal change, or the principal bridge, if you will, to the relevant ethical requirements is in A107D. And this is general wording that is still in process. It's subject to further discussion with IAASB, but the intent here is in fact to describe how relevant ethical requirements may address using the work of another practitioner. And in the case of the code, if it's assurance work, you've got code section 5406 that would apply. And if it's non-assurance work, the work stream, the IAASB work stream, has been working on some requirement and guidance application material that would go into, I believe, section 5300 of the code, and more generally to focus on the responsibilities to apply the fundamental principles relating to integrity, objectivity, professional competence, and due care. So that is the first issue, and it's really a matter of, as I mentioned, providing the necessary bridges to the relevant ethical requirements. The second topic, if move to the next slide, please, Michelle, relates to the issue that was raised by IAASB Committee 1, and that was in reference to using the work of another practitioner in a group component. And the specific concern was using another practitioner work in an entity or a business unit within the reporting entity's operational control, where there's an expectation of sufficient and appropriate involvement. As you recall the discussion in June, and Neil so eloquently explained that this is a reality in practice, that given the rapidly evolving landscape, a wide variety of sustainability matters and different types of engagements that could be performed, you need to allow for the possibility that the practitioner could become aware that a separate engagement had been performed that's relevant within a group component that's relevant to the assurance engagement, and the practitioner may wish to use that work as evidence. Obviously, it's already been performed, could not be sufficiently involved. So to address this particular point, the task force has done a few things. First of all, in the definition, as I mentioned, added the 2 points to the definition to make it clear that if it's another practitioner, the work is in the context of a separate engagement. They are not performing procedures on the engagement. In the paper, we've included for reference the foundational requirement in paragraph 42, and then A87, the application material. Really no change there other than the piece that was elevated to the definition. The principal change to address this is in paragraph A89, and essentially what's happened here is that the task force has strengthened the expectation of sufficient and appropriate involvement to a presumption that the practitioner would ordinarily be involved in the work of another practitioner in a group component. The work of another firm in a group component. It's recognizing that, in fact, the practitioner may become aware that these engagements, a separate engagement may have been performed, and in those circumstances, then the other firm is another practitioner and would be required to comply with all of the relevant requirements in the standard. In paragraphs 51 to 53. And the task force also then discussed and added here that once the practitioner is aware of this separate engagement, and if a similar engagement is performed in subsequent years, then can actually plan for involvement. In other words, the presumption of sufficient appropriate involvement would apply. The change to A90 was really to address the more common scenario for another practitioner in a value chain component. That's the contrast to the, I'll call it the exception that's described in paragraph A89. We did have a timely call yesterday with some representatives of Committee 1. And Vili, I don't know if you would like just to say a few words about that call, and the outcome was a very good call.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And as Dan has indicated, we did have a call with Committee 1 yesterday morning to just go back to Committee 1 on the issue they raised. So that call was also joined by Ken, because the concern was brought to our attention before the two board meetings, IAASB and the IAASB board meetings in June. But this was really an issue for us to solve, because IAASB's position has always been that the concept of another practitioner originates in ISA 5000, and their approach will be to follow whatever we do on another practitioner and obviously operationalize it on the code side. So Dan has explained what the task force has been doing on this, and we've communicated that back to Committee 1. Generally, Committee 1 was very appreciative of the work that we have been doing in terms of this understanding post-exposure, and in particular also in addressing this issue. They noted the rationale around another practitioner, as Dan has explained, as well as the reality of sustainability information, that you are going to get these instances where another practitioner may be involved in relation to a group component. They expressed a view that the representatives expressed a view that they think the changes to the definition in the essential material, making it clear that the work that is intended to be used has been performed in relation to a separate engagement, is very helpful, and also helpful in introducing, and it's also helpful that we are proposing introducing these two presumptions, because as we explained to them, we are really trying to say, you know, there's a principle involved of saying, yes, obviously when an entity is within the controlled group, you would expect to be able, or you would presume that you would be able to be sufficiently appropriately involved. But then there's this practical reality that we have to deal with. And the presumptions are really intended to try and narrow this as far as possible. And then lastly, it also resonated very much with them. What Dan also said is that when you have finally decided that you are going to have to go down this path of another practitioner, it is important to remember that you still have to fulfill the requirements in paragraphs 51 to 53. You still need to get comfortable with that work. And if you can't get comfortable with that work, you cannot use that work. And as Dan said, I think it was a very good call and good in terms of just going back and closing the loop with them. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Willie. And Tom, with that, we can open it up for input from the board. And Tom, we can do this one of two ways. We can just get any input from the board on either of these two issues, or we can focus first on the first one, the work versus assurance work, and the changes that are described in paragraphs 9 through 11 of agenda item 1B, and then turn to the second issue, whatever you think would be most appropriate.
I think let's do the work versus assurance work first and clear that out. The second one, I remember us discussing sort of like having like a visual diagram of how some of this all works in our application material will be helpful to help navigate in it as well. Hernan.
Thank you, Tom. Well, just a concern about paragraph A16 inserted after paragraph A10. Well, I'm really not sure about the need of this new paragraph, because it seemed to be a problem of applying the independence requirement rather than problems to be noticed or addressed in the assurance standards. In my view, stating relevant ethical requirements in other parts of the standards implies the need of evaluating what ethical requirements are relevant in each case. That's my only concern. Thank you.
Tachka.
Thank you, Dan. With regard to work versus assurance, I have one general comment and 3 specific comments. And firstly, my general comment is about the clarification on the distinction between another practitioner's expert and the component practitioner. because the standard contain multiple classifications on who the practitioner may use. That is another practitioner, practitioner's expert, component practitioner. And now on top of this, it is made clear that the another practitioner's work may include assurance work and non-assurance work. And I'm a little bit worrying that this classification may be complicated to put in practice. Depending on the individual circumstances, the practitioner uses the one specific person as either another practitioner's expert or component practitioner. But I think the distinction between these three are not easily understood. I have no, my comment is not about we need to fundamentally change these concepts. Rather, I suggest to add guidance in the application material or explain with graphics in the, again, first time implementation guide to clarify the distinction in order to support a consistent application with the standard. That is my general observation. And my second comment is like Helnam about the paragraph A16. I can understand what this A16 is saying in a general manner, but it is not clear how practitioner may react given the explanation in A16. So my suggestion is look at this wording and clarify the intent, or if it's not needed, delete this application material. And my third comment is on A16A. Thank you, John. I understand this is from the paragraph in ISE 3000, and I know this is trying to add application material to explain non-assurance work that could be used by practitioner. But I find this application material is a little bit hard to understand because it's a bit theoretical. So maybe it is more useful if we could have some explanation about specific non-assurance work that can be used as an example or some extra explanation. And my last comment is on the requirement 51 small a and small b and A107 big D. And from 51 small b, a requirement for the practitioner to evaluate another practitioner's independence has been removed. And from the newly added A107 big D, where it refers to IAASB code and mentioned only about the assurance work another practitioner, I understand right now IAASB code does not include related requirements for non-assurance work of another practitioner. But thank you from your explanation, Dan. Now I understand that there will be relevant provision in the code in the future for non-assurance work. But considering the two changes, right now, I think the standard looks as though the practitioner is not required to evaluate the objectivity of another practitioner at all when their work is for non-assurance work. And I'm not sure if this is what the task force intended. So one possible solution I had is that to add the word objectivity to paragraph 51 small b and require the practitioner to evaluate another practitioner's objectivity even when their work is for non-assurance, because this change will also make the requirement consistent with the requirement to the practitioner's expert at paragraph 54 big A, small a. That is one of the suggestions. Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you, Sachiko. Eric?
Thanks, Tom, and Dan, thanks very much for the explanation of the approach here, which I thought was very helpful. And I was generally supportive of the direction. Similar, however, to comments from Sachiko in relation to A16 and A16A. I had a couple of thoughts there. First of all, so my understanding is that basically what this is about, it's sort of alerting the practitioner that if you're planning to use the work of another practitioner that may or may not be assurance work, the practitioner needs to be aware that there might be specific relevant ethical requirements that need to be complied with before you can use that work. And it depends on what the nature of that work is. But I would have thought in that circumstance, the practitioner would go and look at the relevant ethical requirements to kind of figure out what are the requirements related to that work and the nature of that work. So I found A16A kind of led me down the wrong path, because it made me start thinking of, well, am I as the practitioner required to go and figure out the nature of this engagement and what it was all about, and whether it is or is not an assurance engagement. And I didn't think that was the intent. I thought the intent was basically that the practitioner would find out that information by looking at the relevant ethical requirements. So, you know, I wondered whether A16A is actually necessary, because I'm not sure the context is clear for that paragraph anymore. And agree with others who've commented on A16 that there's, you know, it's helpful to sort of alert the practitioner that there may be relevant ethical requirements that are different, but it doesn't go far enough to kind of say and you know what you do about that. So those were my comments on those two paragraphs. I think I'm hoping that we could bolster A16 a little bit about to sort of expand on the implications, and then reconsider whether in fact we really need to get into this level of detail about what is or is not an assurance engagement in the standard here. Thank you.
So,
Thank you, and thank you, Dan, for the helpful explanation there. I'm probably consistent with some of the other comments that have already been made. I had similar observations to Sachiko about the different distinctions between the practitioners. It's helpful to kind of set it out, but also in practice it could be the same organization being used in different ways. So I just wondered whether we could perhaps bring that to life in a slightly different way. I found the construct in A16A quite complicated. I think I do understand what we're trying to get to, I think, but I think the phrasing of the lead into the bullet points with the way the negative works, I found very difficult as a native English speaker to try and work around, and we certainly debated what it meant. So I wonder whether there's a way of if we do keep that in constructing it in more of a positive rather than a negative way. And then I'm not sure whether we're going into A107A, but if we are, I just had an observation there around the first bullet where we were questioning whether that was actually moving into being a component practitioner. And again, just struggling to understand some of the detail of that particular example. Thanks.
thank you, Julie.
Thank you. And my comments are relative to paragraph 11 in the paper for the board. And Dan, I'm hoping this is just a wording issue for me and nothing more than that. But in the definition of another practitioner, we call out the assurance engagement. And then in little a and little b, we refer to the sustainability assurance engagement. And I think those are the same thing. And if they're not, then I've misunderstood. But I think it's important because when you start to read little a and little b, that is an important context because it's talking about procedures for the sustainability assurance engagement versus just work that's being done for a separate engagement. So I hope we're just missing the word sustainability in the definition for another practitioner. And then I had similar views on A16 and A16A. A16, when I had some discussions internally, was, okay, now what? What do I do? What's my next step to this? So I think others have commented on that as well, as to what's the implications as a result of A16. And A16A, thank you for providing the background as to where that came from, because that was one of my questions. I don't know if we necessarily need A16A. Reading it cold, not realizing it came from 3000, but reading it cold almost seemed like the little A in that paragraph would trip you into assurance work anyway. And so it was a little bit confusing to work my way through that one. So I guess, like others, I don't know if we need A16A. Thank you.
Thank you. Ida?
Thank you, Tom. And I guess I'm just going to pile on. But I was, and thank you, Dan, for clarifying rationale behind inserting this. But even having heard that, I'm still trying to figure out in my mind what problem we're trying to solve here. Because we just refer to work in general, and then we try to distinguish between assurance work and not assurance work. And I appreciate that from an IAASB point of view, there may be different ethical requirements for which that practitioner, so potentially in our standard, another practitioner or pieces of it would be relevant. But it's yeah, again, I was I'm aligned with comments of, well, A16, A16A, does it really add anything to our standards? If I then on A16A, even appreciating that it may have been lifted from 3000, well, we struggled with the language as well. So alongside with some other comments made before, Julie, for example, but also any written report is expressly restricted. Well, most of these reports are restricted, so they're all out potentially. And I was also so there's a couple of things and we refer, for example, in the paragraph to the ISAs, but there may very well be engagement still performed under the ISAEs, and those would be out now? Question mark. So maybe if I follow on then to requirement 51, because I had a similar observation as Sashiko. I struggled with removing the evaluation by the practitioner, whether another practitioner is independent / objective. That seemed to have been removed now, and we include a general requirement that when we do an assurance engagement, we need to comply with ethical requirements. Well, we already have requirements that require us to be applying ethical requirements. So I think this is superfluous. Well, we don't need this because we're already bound by ethical requirements, and we can point in application material in this context that ethical requirements may be specific as to using work of another practitioner. But this hardly feels appropriate to repeat here. And it takes away from the requirement of what the practitioner needs to do. And before you can use the work of an other practitioner, you do need to have a view as to another practitioner's independence or objectivity. So I think that is, yeah, and the rest is in respect of the next sections that we deal with. Thank you very much.
Michelle?
Thank you. So I think the others have already covered on A16A, the need for A16A, so I'll not repeat on that. And just one other suggestion was that with respect to non-assurance work, I feel that we should also give some examples, because AUP, agreed upon procedures, is also a non-assurance work, as well as advisory would also be a non-assurance work. So whether both would be treated at par when we would be applying these provisions. Thank you.
Dan, you got a lot of feedback on this, a lot of focus on A16A. Your reactions? We always knew that this was the most complicated element of the issues we were bringing back.
Yeah, and maybe now a little bit more complicated. Really, really good and helpful input. Let me try to work through some of the comments. I think my takeaway from this is some additional clarity is going to be needed here. Ado, maybe I'll start with your question is, what problem are we trying to solve here? And the problem really is, or the issue links to the requirement of, what if a practitioner is going to use the work of another practitioner, what is needed to be done in order to be able to use that work. And that includes the consideration or the fulfillment of any specific relevant ethical requirements that apply or may apply to using the work of another practitioner. So all of what has been done here is trying to address that particular point. And it's, part of it was starting in the definition of another practitioner with A16 and A16A to first introduce the notion that the work that you might be using or intending to use could be either assurance or non-assurance work. And depending on that, the relevant ethical requirements may have either be different, have different requirements, or require different things of the practitioner in order to be able to use the work. One thought that comes to my mind is we may need, in the first instance, better links between A16, A16A, and the requirement. And maybe that we don't need any application material for another practitioner and deal with it all in the requirement. That's just a quick thought the task force can have a look at. With respect to, because there were quite a few comments on A16 and A16A themselves, the task force can take that away. I think A16 was, again, it was a more general requirement, just noting that the requirements may differ. That is actually brought out now in the application material to paragraph 51A. So whether A16 is still needed or maybe be able to combine in some way with the application material and the requirement, that can be looked at. A16A is a little bit different animal, and I may reach out here to Billy, to you, or even to Ken if you want to say anything about this. But recognizing that the relevant ethical requirements that may apply to using the work of another practitioner can be different depending on the nature of the work, whether it's assurance or non-assurance work, that kind of begs for some guidance somewhere in terms of, well, how do you make that distinction? What are you dealing with? And that's why it was suggested that perhaps the best place for that would be in 5,000, because there was some material in 3,000 to draw on. Fully take the points from the board here that perhaps the wording may need to be tweaked and clarified. I will say, with respect to the A through D in that paragraph A16A, it does say if all of the following apply, not any of those points. that may not help much in terms of adding clarification. And an example may help too, whether it's here or in the application material. But Vili, maybe I'll ask you to come in and see if you have any further thoughts on A16A in particular, but in this area in general.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I think the only thing I want to add here is that in specifically looking at A16A, I agree with you based on the comments that we've received from the board members. We can certainly go and look at the wording and making the message and the intent clear. I think that's important. However, we did believe that we need to give the practitioner a steer about what is assurance work and what is non-assurance work. And if we haven't clarified that properly, we can certainly have a look at that, because the flip side of the coin is the reality is the work that we are referring to can be assurance work or non-assurance work. That is a reality. And therefore, if we don't say anything, where does that leave the practitioner? I mean, how does and we wanted to give that guidance in terms of, so when are you dealing with assurance work and when are you dealing with non-assurance work, so that you are then applying the requirements of paragraph 51, you are then able to execute on the right elements of what that distinction drives. But again, I see your hand is up as well. And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you said that equally on the code side, you will give that steer. You may mirror some of the wording that we have here in terms of assurance work or non-assurance work. But like I said, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But Ken, please come in.
Thank you, Vili. Just in relation to your question just now, my sense is we are not going to explain in the code what is assurance versus non-assurance work. This is from the IAASB perspective. This is a matter that ought to be clarified in ISA 5000. But what I really want to emphasize is that it is going to be critically important from the code perspective to provide, as you say, a clear steer to practitioners to whether they're looking at assurance work versus non-assurance work. And I say this in the context of the many questions we did receive when IAASB was developing the independence requirements and the provisions relative to group audits. And there we have defined a group audit client to include components at which audit work is performed. And really practitioners struggle to understand what the concept of audit work meant in that context. And that was in the audit context, in order to be able to determine when to scope in a component for the independence provisions. So in the context of ISA simulations engagement, it is going to be equally important for the practitioner to know whether they are in independence, and therefore they're going to have to apply all independence requirements that will be called for relative to using the work of another practitioner, or whether they're just looking at a piece of work. It could be an agreed upon procedures engagement. It could be a certification that's been done according to precise specifications agreed or mandated by a particular body. Whatever the piece of work is, there has to be clarity as to whether that work is assurance work, because if it is assurance work, that other practitioner will be required to confirm whether they've been independent in accordance with the independence provisions that apply to system assurance engagements in the code. So that's why I think it's going to be very important to have clarity in ISA 5000, because otherwise there's going to be a lot of questions that it's not going to be for IAASB to clarify whether you're looking at assurance work or non-assurance work. That has to be clarified in the assurance standard, or some other way, if that's not the direction that you would like to go.
Edo, you have a reaction to that?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Tom. And yeah, I still think we're overcomplicating the matter. At the end of the day, the practitioner needs to understand with the objectivity of another practitioner, and that in that evaluation, they assess whether another practitioner was subject to certain relevant ethical requirements, and whether they complied with them. Yes, that is important, but that comes as part of that evaluation. And as part of that evaluation, you may look through what independence requirements were applied in executing the work, and that another practitioner may point to, well, this was an assurance engagement, and so we applied this and this and this, and then you need to evaluate whether they applied it appropriately. I don't think we need to front end all of this in our standards. We can just refer to, as you do your evaluation, you consider the relevant ethical requirements that were applicable for that particular piece of work or that engagement. And I still think that would be a better understandable element. And whether or not it was an assurance work engagement or not, yeah, they come with separate ethical requirements, but that is for another practitioner to explain to the sustainability practitioner. Thank you.
Dan or Billy?
Well, I mean, Tom, I think it's clear that we need to take this back, have the task force talk about it a little bit more, look at the clarity of the wording, and also talk this through with our IAASB colleagues to make sure that we're on the same page and focusing on the same objective here. I will say that in 51A, the task force had quite a bit of discussion on this in the context of the coordination discussions, and that the task force felt it was simpler and cleaner, better to simply indicate that in order to use this work, you first have to comply with whatever relevant ethical requirements may be there, specific to using the work of another practitioner. And maybe we need to think about the words, Ado, to your point, but the practitioner is not in the instance of the code, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, evaluating in a sense they are, but not specifically determining the independence. The code requirement in 5406, if you're going to use the work of another practitioner, is to confirm that independence. So if we wanted to write the requirement in a way to make sure that what the practitioner, the sustainability assurance practitioner here is required to do is what the requirements in the code indicate should be done, whether it's with respect to assurance work or not assurance work, and that's the issue that we're going to have to tackle here and try to do it in a way that is clear and understandable.
Maybe Dan, I can maybe just add to that especially when it comes to non-assurance work, you have to remember that we are now almost in a situation akin to using the work of an expert. It's not an expert, but it's akin to that. And remember, on the code side, and Ken, please, again, if I have this wrong, come in, but on the code side, the code is not writing ethical requirements for the expert. The code is writing ethical requirements for the sustainability assurance practitioner when they want to use the work of an expert. And similarly here, it is they are go to the relevant ethical requirements, and sustainability assurance practitioner comply with the relevant ethical requirements that are applicable to you in wanting to use the non-assurance work of another practitioner. And so there's a little bit of a different lens to this.
Yes, that's correct, Billy.
And to me, I think the key issue is the basic acceptance of what Ken and I mean, what Dan and Billy have just said, and the need for like hooks and reminders in the standard itself, and then they could focus on the wording in the task force. Otherwise, it's a more serious substantive matter. Are people fine? Like, I think there's a need for clarity, consideration of wording. Certainly, I think, Dan, is this one that certainly the task force would welcome suggestions, but I think the intent needs to remain the same, or will open up challenges, particularly as it relates to some of the IAASB issues and the other issues in terms of coordination and our standards. Okay. Dan, I think that's the first half of the question we were trying to deal with, but I think we may have spilled a little bit of the second half too. Do you want to just remind people of what the second part of the input you were seeking was again, since we had a long conversation there?
Yeah, sure, Tom. It's you know, the second part of this issue on another practitioner is the committee one issue in the concern relating to using the work of another practitioner in a group component, essentially, and you know, that is that's addressed in or at least the task force's proposed wording is addressed in paragraphs 12 to 12 and 13 of agenda item 1B. And Tom, I'm just wondering, before we do ask the board for any comments or questions, if we wanted to take a break. We've been at it for an hour and 40 minutes or so.
Do people need a break or want to keep going? Not if you want a break. I think, why don't we finish this, see how quickly we get through this topic.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no problem. So with that, just open it up for any comments or questions or suggestions on the task force's proposals here on this particular issue.
We're on page 7 of the issues paper, if I'm right. Okay, someone from the fraud task force wants to come in.
Dan, is this appropriate to make a comment on A89 at this point? I just want to make sure I'm in the right place. A89?
Yes.
It's really the last sentence of the proposed drafting in A89 that I take a little bit of concern with. I think I understand the spirit of what we're saying there, in that there may have been late breaking news, or you may have come across a separate engagement during this year's sustainability engagement that therefore you weren't able to be sufficiently appropriately involved, and that might occur that might be a recurring thing. And then the following year you could do something different because you are now aware of it. But I'm just concerned with the way this is written. It's really very strongly written that will always be a presumption that you can. And I think that's, for me, it's too strong. Like, I think the reminder could be helpful that you may, you may encounter the same circumstance, and therefore you may think about this differently the next year. But I am concerned with the way this is worded, that it's an automatic presumption that you're going to be able to do something differently, when you probably need to think about that in the context of that next year's engagement separately. And so, yeah, really on all the paragraphs, that was the one that I had the most struggle with.
Yes, thank you. I was overall quite happy with this bit, with the work of using the work of the other practitioner. I paused on where Julie made a comment on, but yeah, I think I'm comfortable with what the task force has written up. My comment probably relates more to A17D, and it's a minor comment, but I still wanted to raise it because we refer in the second sentence, for example, the IAASB code sets out specific requirements and application material. And do we usually refer to, I thought we usually only refer to requirements because the application material comes alongside the requirements. And in the next sentence, we refer to requirements and guidance. So you may want to have a look at the language used there, Dan, for the purpose of one or A107D. But overall, I was quite happy with this bit. Thank you.
Thanks. Eric?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I was just struggling a bit with the concept of a presumption, particularly when later in the same paragraph we say, although you might be able to go and use this other work anyway, and if so, you follow these requirements. So it's a bit of to me, it was a bit of a mixed message that I'm not sure people will get, and sort of is, if there's a presumption that you would do something, then normally you would expect that would be the requirement that you would have to follow. But it seems to be saying, but nevertheless, you can use the work anyway as long as you comply with these requirements. So I was really struggling with what the message was here, and I had similar consider the following sentence, the last sentence. It seems to suggest, it's really talking about the future, and I'm not sure that the future is the right place. That this is the right place to talk about future engagements and what you would do. But perhaps there could be some changes to the wording that might soften that a little bit. But those are my comments. Thanks.
Right. Someone from the fraud task force, I think it's Wendy.
Yeah. Oh, hi. Thank you, Tom. I just wanted to come in on A89 as well, which I'm going to send in as editorials if that's a concept. The words after, for example, I'm not sure what they say, that firm may, but you can, it's not really a question, it's just to highlight it. And I also similarly, the last sentence I struggled with, either take it out or I will send in an editorial on that as well. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, I hear mainly some suggestions about thinking about wording and clarification. Like Eric, I think what you're struggling with is effectively the fact that we're dealing with some pragmatic issues here, but we're also trying to constrain a little bit of the operating environment and drive people into more direction than may have been applied. Remember, we were trying to get rid of a perceived arbitrage here, that they would be lots of declared another practitioner. So, I think that the best we could do here is make sure we take a look at the wording and get the nuances as good as we can, and get the balance. If you have suggestions on wording, I'm sure the task force would be open to it. But I hear some questions on, can we relook at the paragraph 89, the final sentence as well? But I didn't hear any major substantive objections to the approach in this section. Maybe some tonal issues, but really focus on wording. Bill?
I hope this is helpful, but for Julie and Eric's view, the presumption that you can be sufficiently involved in the work of a group component is in the definition. It's not just a presumption that's come up in this paragraph. It's been in the definition, and it's fundamental to how you go about a group component. Group component.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, Dan, anything else?
No, Tom, I agree with your assessment. I think this is all about wording and clarity. I think I do take Eric's point in looking at A89. Just we may have a look at the construct, because the intent of this paragraph was really to address I'll call it the exception, which was the inability to be involved in work in a group component when you would expect that to happen. So we're kind of dealing with the presumption, the normal course, and the exception in the same paragraph, and we might look for ways to better separate that, and the task force can have a look at that. So I think we've got sufficient direction on that one, Tom.
Great. Okay. I'll ask the same question I asked earlier. Does anyone need a break right now, or should we continue to plow through? Plow through, I hear.
Plow through. Okay, so we're going to take the next bit here on experts, practitioners expert, and that's it's section F of agenda item 1B, and essentially here, the issue is explained in the paper. The task force was asked to look at providing a bridge in the application material to the relevant ethical requirements that may address what the practitioner does if you're unable to determine or do determine that the external expert does not have the necessary competence, capabilities, or and objectivity for the practitioner's purposes. So the proposed revision is it's a new application material paragraph that you see in the paper here, and it's wording that has been provided to the experts project work stream, but has not been fully discussed with them. As Willie mentioned at the early in the call, we do have a call later today with that work stream, and we will be talking a little bit more about this particular wording. But the intent was to try to bridge a gap here that was perceived because ISSA 5000 does not have a specific requirement in terms of what to do if you're unable to or do determine that the expert doesn't have the necessary CCO here. And the intent, or as mentioned in the paper, the task force thought that it was implicit in the requirements that in that situation you would be unable to use the work. So we'll continue to coordinate with our IAASB colleagues on that point. And then the last little bit on the slide relates to the definition of expertise. You recall that this is not defined. Expertise is not defined in ISSA 5000. We're using or applying, if you will, the ISO 620 definition, which is skills, knowledge, and experience. And IASB in their exposure draft had defined expertise as being only knowledge and skills. So we're in the process of coordinating on that particular matter. And again, Willie, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that latter point.
No, Dan, I think except for the fact that the ethics board is aware, also through the coordination meeting that we had last week, in respect of the last point about expertise, we've also pointed out that in the end, all three those matters, knowledge, skills, and experience, do factor into your consideration of using the work of an expert. and Ken and his team has undertaken to go back to their task force on that. And yeah, we will take it up with them on the coordination call we have later today.
Okay, thank you, Billy. And so, Tom, it's just whether the task the board has any comments or questions about the direction that's proposed in the paper, particularly this one application material paragraph.
Any comments on the application material paragraph? Someone from the fraud task force?
Thanks, Tom. It's Wendy. First, I don't think I got to say earlier that I really appreciate the progress that has been made since June. It's a very short period of time. So kudos to the task force, joint, all the coordination that's taken place. My comment is on A111B, and I wasn't really sure, looking at what's in the presentation about a bridge and the paragraphs 14 and 15, I wasn't really sure if we needed to consider, or I'm asking you if we did consider making it an explicit requirement as opposed to thinking that it was implicit within 54, the way that it's constructed. And then if we made it explicit, I wasn't really sure if we needed a bridge or if a bridge and application material are actually the same thing. But my preference would be that it's in the standard itself. No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, anyone else? Dan, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Tom and Wendy. Thanks for your comments and for the suggestion there. The only thing I might say about that is we have to be careful about not doing something in 5000 that would undermine ISO 620, so they give some further consideration to that. But as I mentioned, whatever direction is taken here by the task force, there's still further discussion to be taking place with the experts work stream from IAASB on this wording and on this matter in general. Tom, with that, I think we can move to the.
Sorry, Dan, just one more.
Sorry, Billy. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Just one more point on Wendy's point. I agree with what you explained about not undermining 620. The other reason also is why we do need this bridge is because of section 5390 in the code. So we do need to still also highlight that relevant ethical requirements may include requirements that address evaluating the competence, capabilities, and objectivity of the expert. So the bridge will still be needed.
Okay. Anyone else here? I think you got support. Not. Should we? I think we're going down the home stretch of issues right now. On the final slide, if I'm correct.
We are, and I'm going to turn it back to Claire to take us to the finish line on this one.
Thanks very much, Dan. So we have 4 issues to discuss now. First of all, communication with the auditor, the financial statements, and we are aligned with IAASB on the approach to communication with the financial statement auditor. We'll just need to check with them when they've got their words finalised that our references align with what's in the code. However, more broadly, the communication requirements in relating to non-compliance with laws and regulations in the code are addressed in our application material, which is shown in the paper on page 9, paragraph A370A, which was an existing application material. We've made a couple of tweaks to that I will explain. There has been further suggestion to consider whether we need to move the example in that, or the example of the code to a footnote, so the task force can think about that and liaise with IAASB on that. But the changes are simply to avoid saying consider communicating in our application material, because the code will have consider in some circumstances and require in others. So we need to stay neutral, if you will, and point to the code to provide the exact communication requirements. So that's the change. One change there. Second change is simply terminology of moving to financial statement auditor to align with the way we've used the term we've used throughout the IAASB 5000. So we will continue to coordinate to make sure references, for example, you'll see an existing footnote there referring to the amendments to the code in part 5 of the code. So we'll need to make sure that aligns as IAASB firm up on their wording. But in essence, as I say, we are aligned. There are 2 other matters of communication with the financial statement auditor that we did discuss at the June meeting, and we're not going to bring that. We haven't brought that today. We don't see that as a specific coordination issue with IAASB, but I just flagged that we will be bringing those changes back to September that relate to communication with respect to material inconsistency and the other information that we discussed in June, that we want to move that to a bit earlier in the engagement, and also application material that we had agreed to, the board had asked for us to insert in relation to communication with the financial statement auditor at the planning stage and then throughout the engagement. So as I say, not for discussion today, but just to flag, yes, there are other communication issues and we'll bring those back to September. I'll keep going through the other issues on the slide, and then at the end of this, when I've been through the 4 issues, then we'll open up for discussion. So the second issue around transparency has been addressed and does fully align. So this is really just flagging for you that IAASB and ourselves are satisfied that this has been addressed. Specifically, we have incorporated the public interest entity track 1 project amendments that were made to ISO 700 revised. We've mirrored those in ISO 5000. We discussed that in March. That's reflected in the reporting paragraph, the report content, which is in fact, I will not quote the paragraph numbers because we've changed them a couple of times, but is reflected in that requirement and also in the illustrative report in Appendix 2, illustrative report number 1. So really no change at all there. It's existing. We've already addressed it. The second area of transparency is in relation to fee disclosures, and I'll just flag that I have the plan to issue an FAQ to clarify in due course. This is so that the assurance report, if it's used for disclosure relating to fees, that can be done in the other reporting responsibilities section. And we've agreed with IAASB and the task force are comfortable that there's no need to address anything in the standard on the fees disclosure because that is covered off in the code. So then that leads to the final matter on the screen, and that's the effective date of the standards. And really simply to flag for the board that we've been in detailed discussions with IAASB on the effective date, how the effective date may affect the implementation of their amendments to the code, and how practitioners will manage the effective date. We've been discussing that with our task force. So we are developing proposals and we'll bring those back in September. So really that's it. Over to the board, Tom, for any comments, questions, discussion.
Thank you. Okay. A few of those things are more for notification than anything else, and to come back to you at a later date. But any comments on what Claire described or that is in the paper, particularly as it relates to communication with the auditor of financial statements? Does that mean support of the approach, particularly on the communication with the auditor of the financial statements? Okay, and we will certainly come back to you as it relates to effective dates as well. Team, is there anything else you want to raise in terms of the substance of our progress?
Sorry, I see whose hand is on.
Bill, I'm sorry. Please. You're on mute, Bill.
Sorry, I was just going to ask that for something to go on the September agenda when we do discuss this, and we presumably will approve the standard. Can you give a bit of insight in the executive session on the position in Europe and also the position of where the ISO work is going?
So in terms of our coordination with ISO, there's no secret in terms of our engagement with them at the working group level, and our conversations with the IAF continue as we've described publicly. In Europe, I point people again to the CAAOB, the letter that was sent to the CAAOB, and the recent guidance. Clearly, we're in discussions with the CAAOB, as well as other European stakeholders. We will continue that as we will with other authorities throughout the world. We'll give anyone updates on other outreach more broadly at our September meeting. Willie, I want to turn it back to you right now for any final thoughts from a technical perspective here.
Now, thank you, Tom, and thank you very, very much for the board members. I think the discussion we had today certainly justifies why we had to have this call. So, we knew that these are the sort of a little bit of moving targets, and it was very important for us to bring these targeted issues specifically because they're from a coordination perspective to the board. And thank you so much for the input. There's clearly a few areas. I think in principle, we in the right direction, and the board has confirmed that to us. But in terms of some of the details, we need to just make sure that there's enough clarity around the intent around certain of the requirements and application material. But this has been very useful, and Bill has said he presumes that we will approve after today's meeting and the input we got. We definitely gonna go to September for approval of ISA 5000. So thank you very much, Tom.
That is for certain, Lily. Before I close this out, I wanted to ask Philippe whether you have any perspectives from a PIOB position.
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to congratulate you and the team for the significant efforts which have been made for the alignment and clarification. And I really appreciated the discussion during this meeting and the expectation of some clarification that really will add to a better understanding of some technical particularities in the standard. So I think that, as you know, Tom, the PIOB pays a great attention to the alignment between the two boards and the alignment of definitions and so on. And I think that what I would call the London sessions and the work of the task force have been very fruitful, and I congratulate you and your team for that. And so now let's see the fallout in September for the validation of all of that. But I think that it's on a very good path. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe, for that. So with that, I'm going to close the call. I think we are on a very good path, both in terms of our coordination efforts, and very much thank you to Ken for your time and all of the efforts by his team, and Gabriella for her leadership and in emphasizing the value of this coordination. We will have elements for final sort of checks on where we stand on coordination topics during the September board meeting. When I'm reminded that Philippe is joining us from France right now, where we were going to proverbially go for the gold and approve the standard, but we will have final checks of the process, and an agenda for the September meeting should be forthcoming shortly. We are lucky that both IAASB and we are in New York at the same time too, which is helpful for the process as well. Draft minutes for this meeting will be posted in due course and go for approval in September together with our June board meetings. As you know, we are planning on using a large portion of the 5 days in September, particularly beginning sort of late morning on Monday, and going through late morning on Friday, to make sure that we have significant time to approve a standard and handle the other topics that are on our agenda. So with that, you could see that there's a lot of good work, a lot of work done. I thank the task force and the teams involved in the effort for your time. I'm glad that I've had some exposure to it, so thank you for indulging me for that, and thank you for the whole board for their time. Clearly, you spent a lot of time preparing for this meeting in quite short order, so thank you for that. And I will close the meeting now. Have a great rest of the day, and for you in time zones that need some sleep right now, go to bed. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.